Hello and welcome to a very pointless exercise. In this video, I am going to be making a tier list of the personal skills in Fire Emblem Engage. Why am I doing this? I don't know. It just occurred to me that I wanted to do it, and so I'm doing it. Will I be making more videos like this in the future? Probably not, but I guess if a bunch of people say, yes, you should do more of this, like maybe I'll consider it. But I just wanted to do this one in particular, I guess, because I had been thinking recently about like how good or bad some of the personal skills were, and not only that, how good or bad they might be on other characters than the ones who actually have them. So speaking of which, the intention behind this is to evaluate the skills not as they are on the units that they are, but as like how much value would they offer if you were basically able to inherit your personal skill slot, like when a unit joins, say. So imagine, there's this set of personal skills, and when your unit joins, you can pick one of them, and that's what you get. So this would be true for like all the units in the game. And the question isn't like how many times would you pick a given skill, because the answer for almost, for the vast majority of them would be 0. But the question is, how much value would you get out of picking that skill if you did pick that skill in the general case, right? Obviously, it would be different for different units joining at different times and such, but how much would you actually get out of it? Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully it will become clear if over the course of the video, if it doesn't. But we're going to take it in recruitment order. So starting with Divinely Inspiring Alir's personal skill. This is an easy S tier. Alir in particular makes it look stronger than it would be in the context that I'm talking about, because Alir is available for the entire game, and it is probably at its best in the early game. It's definitely useful throughout the entire game, but early game, +3 damage and +3 damage given, -1 damage taken are both bigger deals in the early game than they are like as time goes on, just because of the way the numbers scale. And because of the way mobility scales and like the opportunities to actually have that adjacency go down over time. But it's still absolutely useful, like up to the final map where I used it to have Etie kill like one of the dark emblems with an Astrostorm. Like it's just very reliably useful, and yeah, like excellent skill in an easy S tier. So next up we have Vander's Alabaster Duty, and this is one of the skills that, or not individually, but one of the category of skills that like made me, when I initially started playing Engage, think, wow, personal skills are really bad in this game. And that's kind of one of the things I want to see going through this list is like, okay, are they as bad as my initial impression was, like as a group? But yeah, this is F tier. So I guess maybe I should say what the skills actually do in case people don't know. So like I don't think I said that for Divinely Inspiring either, but that one's adjacent allies deal +3 damage and take 1 less damage. And Alabaster Duty is if a unit is adjacent to the Divine Dragon, grants crit +5 during combat to both of them. Now, Alabaster Duty is particularly bad on Vander because you even in a I don't know, like an efficient play context, you generally don't really want or need Vander to crit things. And it's not like you're going to rely on that, right? So like even if you were happy about it, like the +5 crit is not going to make him suddenly like, oh, now he's killing everything reliably and I can lean on that. Like it's a super marginal effect in a super niche condition. Now, obviously, I just talked about divinely inspiring. That also requires adjacency, but only requires a Lear, or well, whatever unit had it, to be adjacent, right? Like this requires 2 specific units to be adjacent, and it's just like, you know, crit +5 is not that impressive an effect to require that you be adjacent to this one other specific unit. I mean, it is good that unit will always be deployed, but yeah, it's even not on Vander, I think this is like clearly not a good skill at all. All right, next up we have Verdant Faith, which is Clan's personal skill. If unit is adjacent to the Divine Dragon, grants hit +10 during combat to both of them. So this is also F tier. It's better than Alabaster Duty, just because like hit +10, I think in general is better than crit +5. There are exceptions to that. There are definitely cases where you would prefer to have the crit +5, but broadly speaking, like, you know, being able to fix your hit rates, like that is a boost to your reliability, and that does have value. But again, because it's so specific and the effect is not very large, it's just like you're not going to be able to use next to the Divine Dragon hit +10 to like, you know, consistently like improve your hit rates against bosses, or, you know, against like particularly tough enemies that you have to go get, because like Alir's probably not going to be there. So, you know, in the early game, again, this would be more useful because you are more bunched up. But I still think like the combination of like how specific it is and how marginal the effect is, it's not good. Next up we have Crimson Cheer. Fram's personal skill: if unit is adjacent to the Divine Dragon, grants a void +10 during combat. So I'm gonna try to keep this ordered, but I may give up on it at some point because, like, you know, differences are pretty small. But I'm putting it in between these two. I think a void +10 is better than crit +5, but worse than hit +10. And this will be a pattern you'll see as I put this together, is that in general I prioritize offense over defense. I think that being able to, like, the way that the game is structured, being able to go kill enemies is more important than being able to not die to enemies, because, you know, for one thing, if the enemy is dead, then they can't kill you. And for another thing, like in a lot of cases, not all cases, but in a lot of cases, you can complete map objectives without having to engage in a significant amount of defense. Obviously, you know, if you're playing more slowly, more casually, then that balance does change. But overall, like the offensive stuff is still going to be useful even in that context. But in a context where you're playing fast, there are many maps where your defensive stats really just don't matter very much at all. So yeah, that's why you're going to see me valuing hit, generally speaking, over avoid. There are, of course, cases where your hit is already maxed out, and so you'd rather have the avoid and things like that. So I mean, it is contextual, but still, like, you know, getting to the point of maxing out the hit is a relevant thing for, you know, a number of units for sure. In any case, yeah, so just another skill that's like way too specific. And like, if you were trying to like avoid tank, well, now you need not only the unit that has this skill to be able to do that, but also a Lear to be able to do it, which a Lear may or may not be able to do depending on like what you're doing with them. So yeah, I still think it's better than Alabaster Duty just because the crit is so just like whatever, but it's not very good, and I think it's worse than hit +10. Like I could even see, oh, you know what? I meant to rename these tiers. I don't like having C tier not be in the middle. Something about that bothers me. Okay, there we go. Maybe I renamed the F and then I just forgot to rename the others or something. Anyway, so I guess this was easy A tier, not easy S tier. But that's fine. Anyway, okay, so lost track of what I was saying. I think I was going to say one more thing about this, but I should probably just move on. Next up is Self-Improver. This is Alfred's personal skill, and it says if unit uses weight without attacking or using items, grant strength +2 for 1 turn. Where is it? Here we go. All right, I'm going to say that this is D tier. If anything, I could see an argument for moving it down to F, not up to C, but I'm going to say it's a little bit, it's better enough than these others. Just because they're, like, I don't know if anybody really does it with Alfred in particular. Maybe they do. But there is application for having, enemy phasing throughout the game with the Vantage Wrath Warrior type stuff. And while I still think in general it's far better to be able to take a player phase action other than waiting, it is the case that if you are going to do a big enemy phase thing, then getting that strength boost could be useful. Like, it might help you hit some threshold for being able to one round those enemies. I still think, like, between the infrequency with which you actually need to do that and the fact that you have to wait, which is just not, like, something that you want to be doing most of the time, makes this definitely on the weaker side. But not totally useless, I guess. I guess. Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense. Next up is Energized. Etie's personal skill. When unit recovers HP using an item, grants strength +2 for 1 turn. All right, this is F tier, and I think it's actually even worse than the Steward Trio skills. I mean, in theory, like, okay, so the obvious use case for this is, like, for is a similar thing where you're like, okay, I'm gonna boost my strength for, like, an enemy phase. So I like the fact that I'm taking up my player phase action, similar to Alfred's skill. I don't get to use my player phase action to attack or whatever, but I don't need to because I'm going to enemy phase. But the problem is you also have to be damaged to do that. And if you're doing the Vantage Wrath thing, you don't even want to recover your HP probably. So it's just like the synergy is awful. And like the other thing I could imagine doing is if it didn't say unit recovers HP, if it just said unit uses an item, it would be like, okay, I'm gonna, turn one, like, I'm gonna, like, bring a tonic with me, and then I'm gonna, like, turn one, like, use the tonic, like, get danced, and then, like, do an Astrostorm or something, and I get a strength boost. But, like, you can't even do that because it specifically requires that you recover HP. It's just awful. Like, I like, it's just so, like, how often do you use healing items in this game? Like, it just, like, you stop doing it from very early on. It's, yeah, like, it's impressively bad, I would say. Next up, we have Move to Tears, which is Boucheron's personal skill. When an ally joins a chain attack in this unit's combat, unit deals +2 damage. So this is a tough one for me to evaluate, because chain attacks, like, the value of chain attacking changes a lot throughout the game, and also because I've never really used Boucheron, so I haven't, like, spent time thinking about how I would set this up and how difficult it would be. So I'm gonna go with C tier for this. I think, like, +2 damage is certainly useful, and I think chain attacks happen, or can happen, often enough that, like, you can play to that. If you were to take this skill on, like, a good unit, I think it would not be out of the question to try to set up like a chain attack to support them. One thing you could do, like, that would help, if you're trying to squeeze out some extra damage on, like, a highly mobile, like, kind of carry unit, like, playing on a fast map. If you have the DLC, one thing you could do that would help with that is I guess you probably, you could inherit dual assist plus onto your Sorin user, and then have them equip the Siege Tome, whichever one he has. I think it's... Is it Meteor? Oh, I don't even remember. He has some Siege Tome that he can use. So, like, something like that. Like, there's a similar thing that you could do in Three Houses with, like, Dorothea, I think it was, who had, like, where you could get supports from, like, massive range because of, like, essentially a Siege Dome. Like, you could do a similar thing here with that setup, but that is very specific. But other than that, like, I think, you know, it will come up, and it is, like, legitimately useful in the early game. It's not, like, so useful on Boucheron because Boucheron is the one who's doing the chain attacks mostly. But, you know, if you could move it to another unit that, like, if you could inherit it onto another unit that could take advantage of Boucheron's chain attacks, then they would do more damage, and that would be nice. So, yeah, I'm going with C tier for this. I could see this going either up or down, though. It's a tough one for me to evaluate. All right, next up is Gentle Flower, Celine's recovery items used by allies within 2 spaces heal plus 50% HP. Man, this is so trash. Oh my gosh. Like, who cares? Why? I just, like, it hardly ever comes up, like, that you're even using recovery items. And then, like, when you are, they already, like, vulneraries already do 15 HP. That is, like, when you're using those in the early game, that is, like, a big percentage of most units' HP. You know, like, if for whatever reason you were using an elixir later, that's 30. Like, how is that not good enough? Like, I don't. I just don't. Yeah, is it, like, I think this actually manages to be worse than Energize, because even though it's going to go off more often, probably in the sense that it will go off, like, 1 or 2 times maybe in a playthrough rather than never. Like, if you wanted to use Energized, like, you could probably get some value out of it, but this just doesn't do anything. Like, it's so... All right, next up we have Fairy Tale Folk. If a male and female ally are adjacent within 2 spaces, unit deals +2 damage during combat. So I'm going to call this one D tier kind of reluctantly because I dislike the design of this. It's too finicky. This is the kind of skill that, you know, when people say, you know, like, the personal skills are like, you know, every second Tuesday if, you know, there's a full moon. Like, I mean, this is the kind of skill that, like, you know, makes people characterize them that way, because it's just, like, adjacent within 2 spaces, like is so that's such a, like, a small. It would be one thing if it was, you know, if a unit within 2 spaces is adjacent to a unit of the opposite gender or something. I don't know. But, like, and I guess the problem with that would be then, like, you could just put, like, a male unit next to Chloe, for example, in Chloe's case. But, like, it's like you have to be so clumped up to activate this. And it's just, like, it's really hard to account for this even in the early game when your units are very clustered, let alone, like, as you progress. And, you know, you might just not have, like, the right, like, distribution of unit genders or whatever. That being said, it does go off sometimes even if you're not trying to make it go off. So, like, it still has some value from that standpoint. It's not, like, it's definitely not, like, totally useless. It's just, like, really fiddly. So that's why I'm putting it in D rather than F. Next up, we have Admiration. If 2 female allies are adjacent within 2 spaces, this unit takes 2 less damage during combat. This is Louis' personal skill. So this I'm also going to put in D tier, but below these two, mostly, again, because it's a defensive rather than an offensive skill. This one is, like, is arguably a little easier to set up because it only really cares about where your units end up. Well, that's not exactly true, right? If you want to make a player face attack, you might still want the defense. But there, at the very least, there's I mean, again, I guess that's also true of Fairy Tale Folk, except that if you're doing heavy enemy phasing and you care about this, like, you probably don't want those other units that close by. So it's like a little awkward. And I mean, I guess that goes for Admiration as well. So yeah, it's all just awkward. But yeah, basically, like, the fact that it's a defense boost rather than a damage boost is why I bumped that down and why I'm putting it below Self Improver. But you know, it's they're all definitely on the weak side anyway. And mostly being kept out of F tier because these skills are truly atrocious. But you can probably already start to see why. I'm like, you know, you're playing through the game, like, these are the first 10 skills you get, and you're like, man, what is all this garbage? Like, so the next one we get is Train to Kill. Yunaka's skill, while unit occupies terrain that provides an avoid bonus, grants crit plus 15. I mean, this definitely is a step up from all of this trash. I am torn on how to rate this one, because I believe but I'm not certain that if you were in a class like Wyvern, you would never get to take advantage of this skill because you're never, like, getting the terrain bonus. I'm reasonably confident that you have to actually get the bonus, not just be on a tile that has an avoid bonus. So that definitely limits the application, and so probably the most relevant application is going to be in Warrior or Berserker. And the issue there is, like, you know, Wyvern has the mobility where, like, picking a tile with an avoid bonus is going to be easier. It's going to be more difficult to do that in a class like Warrior or Berserker. And I just, like, it's kind of a map specific thing that you'd have to look through individual maps and say, okay, is there a relevant or useful avoid tile that you can leverage to activate this skill? And I think in a lot of cases, for the more, like, for the kind of boss kill type maps, the answer is going to be no. Like, probably almost universally, like, they don't put avoid terrain near the bosses unless you can pull the bosses, and then, you know, get them moving, and then you can take up the avoid terrain, which definitely is a thing sometimes. But if you're doing, like, enemy phasing, then it becomes more plausible that you're going to be able to use that avoid terrain. So yeah, it's tricky. Ultimately, like, I'm going to go with C tier here. I'm going to put it below Boucheron, but I could be wrong about this. Like, it really needs to be evaluated in the context of various maps. How good this actually is. Like, it could definitely actually be D tier if it's too hard to activate, and if it's easier than I think to activate, it could be B tier, but I'm just kind of splitting the difference and going with C tier. Next up, we have Get Behind Me, Al Christ's personal skill. When an ally within 2 spaces is attacked, grants strength plus 3 to unit for 1 turn. So this one, I'm going to say, is also C tier. I think, like, this is definitely another one of those skills that's better in the early game, because you're going to have more opportunities to activate it. Like, in the late game, it's going to be increasingly the case that you're just never going to get the opportunity to activate this. But in the early game, like, you will, and you can still use it. Like, so unlike, well, I guess, Self-Improver, right? So, like, if you wait on player phase, you get the strength plus 2 for enemy phase, but you don't get it for, like, the next player phase, which is where you would most want it, probably. But I mean, you can get it for that player phase if you get danced or something. But for Get Behind Me, you do get it for the following player phase, and I think that makes a significant difference. You can also activate it, like, mid-enemy phase and then get value out of it mid-enemy phase. That's going to be really finicky and hard to set up, but you can do it. It's also just a bigger effect, right? This is strength +3, this is strength +2, for what that's worth. Anyway, whether it should go above Train to Kill is what I'm, or for that matter, Move to Tears is what I'm thinking about. I think overall this is like gonna be more useful, smaller effect, but like easier to control, and doesn't necessarily require any weighting. I mean, like if you have like your primary physical combat units are like a warrior and a wyvern, you can send like the warrior in first, and then the wyvern would be able to take advantage of this, for example. On a one-turn clear. That's never gonna happen with a a one-turn type of clear with this one. So in that sense, I think this one is better. I think I'm gonna say this is better than Train to Kill as well, but I'm not super confident in that take. This one is just like too dependent on individual maps, and I just don't have the in-depth knowledge of all the terrain to really be able to say. All right, so next up we have Citrine's Generosity. When this unit uses a healing item, adjacent allies also recover the same amount of HP. Also trash. I'm going to say it is a little bit better than Gentle Flower, I guess. But like splash healing, I think in general is better than like more healing on the same unit, because being able to heal multiple units at once with a single action, like in theory, has utility. In practice, the problem is like you're taking an action to use a healing item, and it has to be that specific unit that is injured. It's probably pretty obvious. Like, I probably don't need to explain it in depth, but I do think it's better than Gentle Flower. Okay, woohoo, impressive. Okay, next up is Share Spoils. If there's an ally within one space, grant hit or avoid +10 at a cost of crit -10 to unit, and this is Lapis's personal skill. Yeah, this is a weird one. So I don't actually know why it's phrased as within one space rather than adjacent. That's interesting, I guess. But in any case, so I guess if you're not going for crits, then losing crit is fine. It's like if you're going for crits, obviously that's not good. But if you're not going for crits, it's not really much of a penalty. The problem is that just like the effect isn't very big, and it does require adjacency, which from an offensive standpoint is potentially annoying. Obviously, Divinely Inspiring also requires adjacency, but the effect is so much larger that it's worth, spending the effort to get that situation. And you can apply it to multiple units in a way that isn't true of like a skill like this, where it's only applying to that unit itself. But yeah, I think I'm gonna say this is I think I'm just gonna say this is D tier. It's just like such a small effect. Hit +10 is definitely nice, like against some of the tougher enemies that have really good avoid, but it's between like the activation condition and the size of the effect, it's pretty marginal. I don't know if I think is it worse than, like, these are improving damage, so I think they're probably better. Is it worse than Admiration though? That... probably not. Because this is even more niche in terms of like the triggering conditions. I don't know. This is, I mean, it's a lot of like, you know, slim pickings down here. All right, next up we have Fair Fight. This is Diamant's personal skill. If unit initiates combat, grants hit plus 15 to unit and foe if foe is able to counterattack. So, this one I think I'm actually gonna say is C tier because it doesn't require like it's like self-sufficient. The enemy does have to be able to counterattack to trigger it, but you know, if you're trying to hit a dodgy, avoidy, whatever, enemy, the like, you know, like some of the like harder to hit enemies are things like, you know, thieves and wolf knights that have 1 to 2 range weapons anyway, and having hit plus 15 against them is definitely nice. The penalty of they also get hit plus 15, like, well, you're initiating combat, so hopefully, you know, you can kill them. Right? I mean, maybe you can't kill them without a counterattack, but then again, like, you know, those kinds of enemies also tend to have very high hit rates. So if you are taking a counterattack, you are probably going to get hit anyway, unless you really have a lot of avoid. So I mean, it's not amazing, but I do think like it has some legitimate application. Is it better than Train to Kill? Who knows? Who knows? I guess I'm gonna say... I'm gonna say... I'm gonna say no, but I'm not confident in that at all. Alright, Aspiring Hero. If no other units are within one space of unit or foe, grants hit plus 20 at the cost of avoid minus 10 during combat. So this is very similar to Fair Fight in its effect. Like, avoid minus 10 is the same as giving them hit plus 10. So this is, like, the effect is a bit better because instead of it being 15-15, it's 20-10. But the triggering conditions are... more difficult to meet because you have to be sort of going out on your own, and it's not just that you have to not have any allies adjacent, but also there has to be no enemies adjacent to the enemy, you know, or whatever. So that can definitely be a restriction, a relevant restriction. So I think this is similar, but I'm going to say it is worse than Fair Fight, but I think it probably does belong in the same tier as Fair Fight, just because, again, like having the ability to boost your hit rate significantly is nice for reliability. And I guess a thing that's worth mentioning about that is it's not just about like, oh, I went from like, you know, 90 to 100, 80 to 100, you know, 75 to 90 or 95, or, you know, that kind of thing. Going from, I don't know, like 40 to 60 or something like that is still like a very relevant thing when you have whatever, Draconic Time Crystal, Divine Pulse, Turn Wheel, like being able to, you know, because that stuff compounds over the course of a chapter, right? And if you like, you're like, oh, I really need this to hit, you can do that with, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. But you kind of have like a budget of like how often you can do that in a chapter before you end up just burning all your rewinds. And boosting a hit rate from really, you know, bad to okay, or like kind of bad to okay, or kind of bad to kind of good, or whatever, like kind of thing, is also like useful in that context. So... all right, next up we have Meditation. This is Jade's personal skill. If unit uses weight without attacking or using items, grants res +2 for 1 turn. This is bad. So it's the same as Alfred's, right? Except it gives res instead of strength, and res is significantly less relevant than strength, like definitely enough to drop it a tier. It might, now that I'm thinking about it, it might even be worse than is it worse than Alabaster Duty or not? No, it's not worse than Alabaster Duty, but is it worse than Verdant Faith or Crimson Cheer? Probably not, but it's close. There is some theoretical value to be gained from res +2 enemy phase tanking against mages, and the impact of that should be higher than these if you are doing it. I mean, I think ultimately, like, the best way to enemy phase tank mages is with Avoid. And so you might think, oh, well, that means that, like, the Avoid skill should be better. But, like, because it's conditional on being next to Alir, it's like, Alir, Devil, just attack Alir. So that's not really useful. But yeah, like, I think in general, like, most mages hit rates are low enough that you can, I mean, you can't use terrain for it, but if you just, like, have, like, a fast unit with an Avoid Engraving or something, you know, you can do that. And I think that's gonna be better than stacking res, especially because the units with high res tend to be magical units that then won't do enough damage generally to 1 round. Although I did have one time with Pandre where I managed to get enough magic to enemy phase a bunch of mages, and that felt really good. But then as the game progressed, it was, like, totally impossible. Alright, next up we have Single-Minded. During combat with a foe who is also unit's most recent opponent, grants hit +20. This is Ivy's personal skill. This one is, like, I'm gonna say, I think D tier. So it has applications against, like, bosses, because bosses are enemies that you might need to attack multiple times. You know, you might dance, you might goddess dance, and so on. But, like, if you needed the hit to hit them, you'd really want it to be there the first time as well. I mean, it's still better than nothing, but it's, like, I don't know. It's still pretty, like, dubious, and, like, it has to be, like, in order for it to even be useful in that context, it has to be on a unit that's, like, actually going to act multiple times, right? Which not necessarily every unit that engages that kind of an enemy is going to be acting multiple times, unless, you know, you're only going to, like, the only units engaging them are going to get goddess danced or something like that. Yeah, I think it's just, like, it, like I said, too niche. Maybe it's better than Admiration, though. I could probably see that. Is it better than Share Spoils? I don't think so. I don't think so. Alright, Blinding Flash is next up. If unit initiates combat, inflicts a void -10 on opponent. This, I'm actually going to put all the way up in B tier, because, okay, so this is essentially hit +10. It says avoid -10, but avoid -10, hit +10, same deal. So, like, if you compare this to, like, Fair Fight or Aspiring Hero or Single-Minded, the effect is smaller, but it's reliable. It's every time. Like, you attack them, your hit rate is higher. It's, like, just, like, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to work for it. It's just there. I think that's, like, a huge differentiator here. And yeah, I like really like if you compare it to pretty much all these skills, like it's just like all of these have these specific activation conditions, and this one's just like nope. I mean, yes, it doesn't apply during enemy phase, but whatever. Like that doesn't matter nearly as much in my opinion anyway. And like the cases in which you are the most likely to care about that kind of hit fixing is going to be on player phase. All right, similar thing next up with Zelkov. Zelkov's not quite. If foe initiates combat, inflicts hit -10 on that foe during combat. So this is like the avoid equivalent of the Kagetsu ability. This one, because it's avoid rather than hit, I think I'm actually going to put it in C tier, at the top of C tier. It is like unconditional, but like in general, avoid tanking isn't that strong in this game. The units that like want to be enemy phasing in many cases don't really care about avoid tanking because you're doing some kind of Vantage Wrath thing. I mean, I would have been pretty happy to have this like on Pandreo, for example, when I did have him enemy phase stuff with avoid. So like that is nice. But I just think that that like Kagetsu skill has enough more general applicability that this needs to get docked in comparison. Although I don't know, it is like significantly more reliable than all of this stuff. So I almost wonder if I should like add like another tier in between, but I kind of don't want to do that. I don't know. Maybe I'll move it up later or add another tier or something. I guess we'll see how I feel when I get to the end. Charmer. Fogato's personal skill during combat with foe who is also unit's most recent opponent inflicts crit -10 on that foe. Good lord, is that bad? Is it worse than energized? I think so, yes, actually. Like, this is like Ivy's skill, except instead of doing something useful, it doesn't. Like, you, like, by the point where you already fought them, they already had the chance to crit you once, if that was relevant, which in a lot of cases it isn't. But even if it was, like, what are you doing? Like, I don't, I don't understand, like, why this would, like, ever be something that you could count on for anything. It's so, like, like, the design process here, like, what? Like, I guess you could, like, attack them with a longbow or something, and then go into the range where they can hit you and be like, oh, now you have crit -10. But, like, if their crit is that scary where you need, like, that level of mitigation, like, I mean, there's other ways to do it that are more reliable, whether that's, you know, like using like the Celica engraving, which gives you a bunch of dodge, or just like hitting them really hard and they can't crit you, or I don't know, like, you know, just having avoid rather than dodge. It's just, yeah, it's so specific, and I don't understand. All right, next up we have Party Animal. Pandreo's skill grants a bonus to hit and avoid equal to 3x the number of allies and foes within 2 spaces. So this is definitely another B tier skill. Is it better than Blinding Flash is the question. So Blinding Flash is definitely more reliable. This skill is always, in a relevant way, is basically always going to give you at least hit and avoid +3, right? On both player and enemy phase. Because if an enemy's attacking you, they're probably within 2 spaces. I mean, sure, they could be using a longbow, but like, I don't know. Are you really afraid of longbow enemies for the most part? No. I guess like thunder or whatever. But yeah, the vast majority of the time, you're going to get a minimum of +3 hit and avoid on both phases. It's going to be very common for you to get at least +6. And it's going to be pretty common for you to get +9 or more. And there's no like cap on it. Pandreo, it's like pretty fun having Pandreo just like wade into like a big group of enemies and be like, oh, I have like +15 avoid or whatever, and +15 hit. Like, it is going to be less useful against bosses generally speaking, because it's going to be hard to match up to the hit +10, and then the avoid is generally going to be less relevant. But yeah, it's a tough call between these two. I think I actually am going to give it to Party Animal, just for the overall like the flexibility and like how much it like the fact that it can contribute in more context, even if its contribution in maybe the most important context is generally going to be less. But it's definitely a good one. Next up, we have seconds. On eating a packed lunch, unit may obtain another of the same item. Trigger percent equals luck. I think I have to put this actually last, like even below Gentle Flower and Generosity. This is just so bad. I understand that they wanted it to be thematic. I do. But okay. First of all, you have to take damage to even eat the packed lunch. And then, unless you're specifically using favorite food, the fact that you're using that rather than like a vulnerary or whatever, which, to be clear, as I've said before, is not even like a very relevant thing to do most of the time. And especially by the time you've unlocked the Somniel and lunches, right? It's not like, oh, let me take this with, a leer, for the beginning of the game before I have Fram, which is barely any time anyway. But like, no, you don't have packed lunches until you've unlocked the Somniel and the cafe or whatever. And then you also have to get the packed lunch, which isn't guaranteed. And then you have to take damage and want to use an action to heal it, which isn't guaranteed. And then like, oh great, like, so that means I like saved a charge of like a like a healing item, like whoopee, unless you're using favorite food. Okay, so what about favorite food? Oh, and by the way, the trigger percent luck like thing means it's not even guaranteed, and like, it's more likely than not that it won't even do anything. And then what about favorite food? Like, favorite food isn't even good. Like, it's and especially even if favorite food is good for you, like, you're like, okay, I'm gonna use my engage, and then I'm gonna use it up, and then I'm going to recharge my meter by eating a packed lunch, having taken damage, because I have to have taken damage. I'm going to recharge my gauge. Great. So if this triggers, which it probably won't, you have to use up your engage again, and then take damage again, and then use an action again to recharge your gauge again, and then have something to actually do with it. Like, what? It like blows my mind how useless this is. Oh my gosh. Okay. Next up, we have Racket of Solm. Tamara's personal skill inflicts crit -5 on foes within 3 spaces. So I'm going to say this is bottom of D tier because the effect isn't very impressive, but it is at least like always on. Like, crit -5 is not really going to going to make a significant difference against enemies with high crit rates, with like killer weapons or what have you. Although, I mean, that honestly isn't like that common anyway, but it will mitigate like the low percent crits that can sometimes be annoying. You know, and burn your turn wheel charges or time crystal charges. Like, speaking of, you know, that when I was talking about that earlier, like being able to eliminate or dramatically reduce that risk does have some value. I mean, it's not a lot of value, but it is some value, and the fact that it's not conditional is nice. So like the effect is small, but at least it's there consistently. I could even see putting this over Admiration, actually. Yeah. I think it should go over Admiration. Okay. Blood Fury, Panette's personal skill. If unit's HP is not at max after combat, grants crit plus 10 as long as unit's HP stays below max. So this has got to be B tier for sure. If not actually A tier? Nah, I don't think it should be A tier. Crit plus 10 isn't enough, I think. But the condition is relatively easy to meet, and the context in which you want it, it's like very like it synergizes with the thing that you already want to be doing if you're doing the Vantage Wrath thing. Obviously not every unit wants to do Vantage Wrath stuff, but you know, plenty of them would if you're using them in that role, and like this is just like always going to synergize with that. I think I'm going to leave it below Party Animal and Blinding Flash, just because because the number of units who want to take advantage of these effects, I think, is higher than the number of units that want to take advantage of this effect, and B, the activation condition does exist. Like, you can't really take advantage of this. You can't necessarily take advantage of this turn one. I mean, you can sometimes, depending, but it's not necessarily like easy, and it does sort of, having to activate it turn one has some like anti-synergy with, I don't know, beating maps on turn one. Like, it's not that you can't do it, but like, you know, if you're building a unit that has high crit, and the way that they kill things is with crit, and then you want them to help you clear something on turn one, them taking damage means they're probably not killing with a crit, because they're probably going to crit without the skill activated and without like Wrath activated. I mean, it's not a guarantee by any means, but like that's kind of like their win condition. So hopefully the baseline crit is high enough that they can do that, and then if they do that and they kill the enemy, then they don't take damage. So like that is definitely like a limitation of it. But I still think it can be this high. All right, next up we have Nightly Escort. This is Marin's personal skill. When 2 or more female allies are within 2 spaces, grants hit and avoid plus 5 to unit and those allies. So this is, you know, this is similar in structure to Fairy Tale, Folk, and Admiration. The difference is that they don't have to be like the two female units don't need to be adjacent to each other, and B, the effect is granted to everyone in that radius regardless of like where they are situated relative to the units that are causing the effect to trigger. So it is definitely easier to trigger, but then the effect is pretty marginal. Hit and avoid plus 5, like you know, unlike something like Party Animal, which can like grow, you know, with more units, this is just capped out at like plus 5, and because it requires a minimum of 3 units to be able to do anything, right? The user and then the 2 other units, that like is still it's easier to activate than Fairy Tale Folk and Admiration, but it's still not easy to activate in general. And like party animal triggers off of enemy units and stuff like that. So I'm gonna say this is D tier, but better than Admiration, better than Racket of Solm at least. Is it better than? Is it better than Single-Minded? And is it better than Share Spoils? I think it actually probably is better than both of these. And then is it better than Self-Improver? I don't think so. Yeah. Okay, we'll go with that. I mean, the ordering within the tiers isn't supposed to be that important anyway, but yeah, I'm trying. Okay, next up we have Big Personality. When a unit uses a healing staff, grants range +1. This is Hortensia's skill. Top tier, best skill. It's too good. Like, busted. Absolute busted. Now, it would be, I should say, if it actually worked the way that it's described to work, then it would not be that great. I mean, it would be good, but it would only be like, I don't know, C tier, maybe something like that. But it does affect not all of the movement staves, but I believe it affects warp and rewarp, but not rescue. And it may also affect some of the status staves. I'm not actually sure about that one. I have tended not to use those so much. Like I don't know if it. Yeah, I don't know what, if any of those, it affects, to be honest. The fact that it affects rewarp and warp by itself is enough to make it the best skill, like, in my opinion. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, if it affects Entrap, if it affects Freeze, if it affects Fracture, if it affects Obstruct, great. But it doesn't need to be the best skill. It just, like, the warp and rewarp, that by itself is, like, amazing. Yeah, so it's just super, 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 super good to be able to get an extra square of range out of those things. It makes like, it just gives you more control, makes your planning easier, like gives you more flexibility. Like it's absolutely fantastic. Next up, we have Curious Dance. At start of turn, allies within 2 spaces recover 10% of their max HP. So this one is like, it's okay. I definitely think compared to, I've, in both of my playthroughs, I've used Seadall as, like, if anything, one of my primary healers in addition to dancing, but that was primarily because of quality time. I think quality time, or quality time plus, like, does way more work than this because the play pattern tends to be your dancer, refreshes somebody, they can stop next to the person and heal them, but then the person leaves and they go somewhere else. And so they're not going to get, that's not going to proc Curious Dance. Now, obviously, we're talking in the general case, right? So Curious Dance, I mean, it has dance in the word, but it wouldn't necessarily have to mean that it was on your dancer. But I do think that, between the relatively small size of the effect, 10% of max HP is not a lot. It's chain attack damage, essentially. And the fact that it triggers at the start of the turn, which means you can't, you have to be, somewhat clumped up, does limit its utility. But there is definitely some utility there. It is nice. So I think it has to be in C tier, just because like the stuff in D tier is all like a little too niche compared to this, or a lot too niche. But in terms of like where within C tier it goes, I could definitely see bottom of C tier being correct. Just because all of this stuff is one way or another like helping you like actively kill enemies, and this is not. Like it's just helping you survive. So yeah, we'll go with bottom of C tier for that. Whoa, what is going on with my mouse cursor? I don't know if that's showing up on the video or not, but it's like, it looks like it's not. Okay. All right, so next up we have Stunning Smile. If foe is male, inflicts a void -20 on that foe during combat, and that's Rosado's personal skill. So I think this is another C tier skill similar to, you know, these. It's another skill that's like helps with your hit rate, but can only conditionally. The nice thing is that it doesn't have the downside, and the condition is also, well, in a, if you can trigger the condition, then, or if you can trigger it, then it's easier to trigger. Like you don't have to do anything, but on the other hand, you don't have control over it. That's the big problem with this one, is that like you, like some enemies are male and some aren't, and you don't really have any say in that. And the distribution of enemy genders is pretty even throughout the game, I would say. Like I don't know, you know, like the four hounds are split evenly. Like in the end game, you get, you know, like male, Sombron is a male, Lumera is female, Alir is whichever. Like the emblems, like if you're thinking about like paralogs, are split down the middle. The like some of the other bosses, like Abime is female, and the guy, the chapter 5 boss is male. Corrupted bosses, I don't even know like what those are, but yeah. So I mean, I think it's like, it's something like a 50% chance, and there may be some there may be some key enemies that specifically are male that like tilt this in its favor. But I think the fact that you don't have control over this is definitely like a knock on it. I'd have to look at like specifically like what all the enemies are, and like which ones you're going to care most about having this ability active for. Avoid -20 is definitely like a big effect, so it is like, if it is proccing, it's definitely doing work. But yeah, the but I think, barring that I discover that actually like the gender balance tilts heavily in the favor of this skill, I think I'm gonna say it's worse than these other ones that are where like you at least have control over the triggering condition. Next up, we have Disarming Sigh, a Gold Mary skill. If foe is male, inflicts hit -20 on that foe during combat. So same thing as Rosado's, except it gives you, it like lets you avoid taking damage rather than letting you hit them. And I do think that's worse. Is it worse enough to bump it down an entire tier? Yeah, I think it is actually. I think it goes at the top of D tier. Something I should say about this, I don't know if I said this up front, is that about this whole like, avoid versus hit or like attack versus defense or stuff like that, is like in the context of other games, this would potentially not be true. Like if you're playing like, I don't know, FE7 or like Path of Radiance or something like that, where enemies maybe have actually Path of Radiance might not be a good example because enemies do tend to be bulky, but like FE7, like for sure, if you were playing FE7 where the enemies are like easy to hit and easy to kill, but there's just potentially a lot of them, like having extra avoid, extra defense or whatever might actually be better, especially since you don't have to worry about things like, oh, the enemy won't attack you because it can't hit you or that sort of thing. But I think in Engage, like the offensive thresholds are demanding enough that like this is definitely like you definitely prefer the offense. Also, I guess I mean, if it wasn't obvious, which maybe it wasn't, and maybe I should have said this a while ago, like I'm thinking about this in a maddening context. I haven't even played the game on any other difficulty, so what would I know about that? All right, next up we have Weapon Insight. If unit is equipped with a weapon of lower level than foes, grants crit plus 20 during combat. This is, we finally have a third top tier skill. Now, on Lyndon in particular, like it is unfortunate because, as you might have seen in my playthrough, like he is not the best unit to take advantage of this skill. I mean, you can do it, and I did do it, but it's not like he's definitely not the person who really wants it. But like, man, giving this to like your killer axe, killer bow, whatever user, there's so many enemies that have higher level weapons. It's very reliable to activate if you are using those weapons. The one downside to it is that it doesn't work on like if you're using like the Revanche or some of the like the S tier legendary weapons that, I mean, I, to be honest, the S tier weapons, or the S rank weapons, I guess I should say, I think in general are not very relevant. They're like, you have to be in specific classes to use them generally, and you get them very late in the game, and it's it's all like a little bit like too much effort for too little payoff to like actually use them for the most part. But like the Revanche you get very early, and if you forge it up, it is basically a killer axe with more might. So it is unfortunate not to be able to take advantage of that. If for whatever reason you're using swords or lances instead, I think that doesn't matter as much. The Represales doesn't have the crit that the Revanche does, and there isn't any particular sword that's going to do like better than the killing edge in that respect. The same thing with bows. It doesn't really, like, there's not like some other bow that you would prefer to be using. Now, I guess I should say I don't know what the stats look like on the heroes' weapons. I haven't played with those. I probably will play with them in my next playthrough, actually, but I haven't played with those so far, so I don't know if one of those like comes out looking good, and like I don't even know what ranking they are. I guess I assume they can't be that high ranking, or else you wouldn't be able to use them in unpromoted classes. But you get them like right at the beginning of the game, so I think, or close to the beginning of the game. So you must like I think as soon as you get to the Somnial, so it feels like you must be able to use those at like B rank, if not lower. But anyway, I don't know if they have crit on them. So yeah, for the most part, the point is like you're using killer weapons if you're doing this, and those are C rank, and enemies pretty much running around with either A rank like silver / Olganon, Excalibur, Thoron, or they're using like spears, tomahawks, whatever, like for a large chunk of the game. Not the whole game. And early in the game, this will not do much necessarily. It still could. Like, if you're using an iron weapon against a steel weapon, you'll still get the crit plus 20. It's not going to be reliable, and so it's going to be, it's definitely going to be worse at that point. But there's enough of the game where you can, realistically, reliably take advantage of this that I think it's deserves the spot. I do think it's worse than the other two. But I think it's still, fantastic. All right, next up we have Will to Win, Safir's personal skill. If unit's HP is 50% or less at the start of combat, grants hit and avoid plus 20 during combat. Had thoughts on this and they just flew out of my head. Right. So yeah, this is actually another skill that I think synergizes well with the Vantage Wrath build. Not really because of the avoid, but just because of the hit. So having the extra accuracy is going to help and is going to be relevant on enemy phase. It's going to be tough to activate for maps you're going quickly though. So I'm gonna say that this is C tier. It is. I do think it's better than not quite, because if you are avoid tanking, generally speaking, there are exceptions, but it would be rare for you to be in a situation where you're avoid tanking and you get hit one time and you lose a chunk of your health, but not 50%, but then you get hit another time and you just die, or you just get one shot. That's not super common. It's more commonly the case that either you're going to need to get hit multiple times to go below 50%, or you're going to get two shot, but then that means the first one is going to put you below 50%. I guess technically if you put you at exactly, no, it's 50% or less. So yeah. So even though you're more likely to get hit the first time compared to not quite, you are also more likely to actually avoid the killing blows because you're going to have the extra plus 20 avoid once it's active. There is a caveat to this, which is that it's more likely that you get broken going into that. So that is something to keep in mind, but I still think the overall effect is better, especially because it also comes with the hit plus 20, and that can also be applied to non-enemy phase situations. So I think this one's pretty good. Not quite B tier, but still pretty good. I guess one of the reasons I should say that I think this is worse than Blood Fury is just because the triggering condition is much more demanding. This is 50% or below, and this is just literally any damage. All right, so next up we have Fell Protection. Adjacent allies deal +1 damage and take 3 less damage. I think this also has to be A tier, even though it's clearly worse than Divinely Inspiring, but even +1 damage in the early game is going to go a long way, and -3 damage taken is also valuable. It definitely scales a lot worse into the late game than Divinely Inspiring does, but But it's like it still just would generate so much value in the early and even the mid game that I think, like, yeah, just like having, I don't know. I could see the argument for moving it as low as B tier. I think it'd be top of B tier if you did. It's like, it's a little hard to say because I haven't actually had access to it in the early game or the mid game, so I'm not totally sure that my read on this is correct, and like maybe it would too often be the case that's like, oh, I need extra damage, but 1 damage isn't enough, or oh, I would like to get the +3 protection, but then I'm putting the other unit in danger and they don't actually attack the unit that's getting the protection, and so it's not so useful. Like I'm not sure that that's not the case, but my suspicion is that you would still find a lot of use cases for it. Like if you just imagine that this was the skill that Alir had, like I think you would still use it a lot. All right, next up we have Contemplative for Mavier. If unit uses weight without attacking or using items, grants defense +2 for 1 turn. Yeah, this is F tier. I mean, it's better than, actually maybe, well, maybe either this should be D tier or Admiration should be F tier, because this is it, like, this is probably better than Admiration. They're both bad, I mean, is the point. And this is bad in a similar way to Jade's, except that I think defense is generally more useful than res, but I don't know if it's enough more useful to put it into D tier. Maybe it is. Yeah, maybe we go like this. I mean, unlike meditation, contemplative is something that I think you could legitimately take advantage of in the really early game. Like you're more likely to just be moving towards enemies that are further away and then like waiting, and they're more likely to be attacking you physically. Like I could imagine like this being pretty nice on like Alfred. He's like, oh, like he runs towards some sword fighters and he's getting doubled by them, so like this gives him +4 effective defense. And then yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we'll go with that. All right, finally we have our 2 like out of sequence units, our trainee units. Starting with Jean, expertise. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about Make a Killing first, because expertise is a mess. So the thing about Make a Killing, well, this is definitely one of the skills that like got me thinking about the general quality of personal skills and thinking about making this list. So the thing about Making a Killing, like as it's realized in Engage on Anna, is that Anna is a pretty bad user of it, because she comes in with really low luck and she's frankly just not worth using as a unit in the first place. You have to invest a lot of resources into her to get her to be any good. And so like the amount of value that you can get from this early is very minimal, and then over time you get like as the game progresses, the value of gaining more money decreases. Especially once you hit the point in like the mid game where you get the giant dump of money, like after which point you should pretty much have enough money to do like whatever you want for the rest of the game. Like the point where you would really like to have more money is like, especially between like when you like if you if you do the Brodia donation to maximize your ingots, you can have like end up with very, very little money from then that point like forward for a while. But Anna is just not going to be able to make an impact there. And this is all assuming you're not using the well to like get money. If you are using the well to get money, this ability is irrelevant. It's just, it doesn't matter who has it, like how much money. It's just irrelevant. Like you're gonna have money. It just won't matter. So assuming you're not doing that, then the problem is that even if you put it on a different unit, they're still not going to have like that much more luck than Anna. And they're still not going to accumulate so many kills early that you're going to get access to that, like a significant amount of money early in the game. Like you just don't like. There's just not enough like the rate at which you can generate money off of this skill is just not fast enough. So yeah, I think even if you could put it on any unit in the game you wanted to, it still would just be low impact, even if you're not using the well. The way that you would make a skill like this impactful is if it was like, if you had a unit that was the equivalent of like Seth or Titania, who showed up like beginning of the game, you consistently used, it was worth training them, they got a ton of kills early, like that would do it. But that's not really how it works in Engage. So as a consequence, I do think this is not F tier, because like getting some money still has some value in a way that like some of these are just like way too specific and they just don't really do anything. But I'm not gonna go any higher than D tier with this. Yeah, I think probably bottom of D tier is the spot for it. And then we have expertise. Oh boy. So expertise is really tricky to evaluate because it's so it doubles class growths, and obviously that's going to depend on, like, the value of that is going to depend on what class you're in and how long you're in that class and what like thresholds you're trying to use this to hit that you wouldn't otherwise hit. So, but we can take some specific examples. So let's imagine we're going to use to my two favorite units from my just concluded playthrough as carries. We're going to use Kagetsu and Pandre, and they are going to be in. So we'll put Pandre in Mage Knight, and then we'll say that Kagetsu's either going to be a Wyvern or he's going to be a Warrior. So looking at Mage Knight, Pandre, Mage Knight, the relevant Mage Knight growths are 25% magic, 5% speed. I mean, I guess you could say 25% res, but like you already have enough res, like who cares? But yeah, it's basically 25% magic, 5% speed. Now, obviously going from 5% to 10% speed is nothing, so you can throw that out. 25% magic, you double that, and you get 50% magic, but obviously the difference is 25%. So that means every 10 levels you're going to get an extra 2.5 points of magic, or every 20 levels you're going to get 5 extra points of magic. 20 levels, I think Pandre for me probably gained a little under 25 levels. I want to say he comes in promoted but pretty low level promoted, like maybe level 1, maybe a little bit higher than that. Let me just actually check that really quick. So Pandreo, yeah, level 1 High Priest. I immediately reclassed him, and he finished like, I want to say level 4. Yeah, I want to say level 4. So he got like 19 levels to get to level 20, and then another 3 levels after re-upping. So, you know, not much more than the 20 to get like the extra 5 points of magic. 5 points of magic is nothing to scoff at, but obviously, like, it's not front loaded, right? And like, it would, if it was front loaded, that would be one thing, but it's essentially back loaded. I mean, it's more like spread out evenly, I guess you could say. But like, I would definitely rather just have like an upfront like +2 or even just like +1 magic that I get like right off the bat and just carry forward. The +1, I don't know, maybe not. You how many levels you need? 4 levels to get that first point of magic on average. I mean, with fixed growth, there's a specific point where it's going to show up, and that like actually kind of matters. But yeah, maybe he has enough magic out of the gate that you wouldn't care enough about the +1 that you got right away, that you would rather just have the growths at that point. But like +5 magic is definitely like overselling it, right? Like at the relevant points in the game, it would be a little more like, you know, 2, 3. That's still pretty good though. That's still pretty good. Let's see. Kagetsu. So Wyvern has, where is it? Wyvern Knight has 20 strength and 5 speed. So this is similar except worse. So he's going to get 4 points of strength and an inconsequential amount of speed per 20 levels. So for me, Kagetsu grew like, I think he's also, I think he's like level 2 promoted, maybe? No, he is level 1. Okay, so he, assuming he didn't gain any levels in Swordmaster, which he might have because you don't have access to rings then, so it's hard to reclass him. But I'm going to assume he didn't and say that he got 19 levels in Wyvern, and then I think he got to like level 7 or 8 promoted, or like wrapped around, or however you want to call it. So like another like 6 or 7 levels. So call it 25 levels, which means that 20% extra 20% growth turns into 5 points of strength over that duration of time. So actually pretty similar to Pandreo. So yeah, again, that would be nice. The way I was using him, it actually wouldn't necessarily have mattered because I was doing like a killer axe approach a lot of the time, but it would have still helped with like situations where I wanted him to, you know, use ranged attacks or like the pole axe or what have you. So, you know, again, that's solid. Warrior, I think, is pretty similar, where Warrior has 20 strength. Warrior has 15 speed, so he would get he would get an extra 3 points of speed per 20 levels, same amount of strength. So like, yeah, that would, I mean, he rarely needed too much help with speed, but and that could have been like, I could have, with more SP usage or different SP usage, I could have also given like just slapped like speed plus on him or something. But anyway, so I do think it has the potential to have some real impact along the way. Like I said, +5 or whatever is overstating it, but you know, the point at which you get to like +1, +2, like that will happen like in a reasonable time frame. I think I should also emphasize here is I'm talking about units who come in promoted, and you might think, well, okay, but what about, you know, if this was on an early game unit like Chloe or something? But it's worth keeping in mind that the class growths of unpromoted classes are lower, so the impact is lesser. So and you wouldn't spend so much time in them anyway. So in the aggregate, like that maybe gives you like 1 point of something relevant. It's like, it maybe doesn't even, depending on like when, you know, what the starting level is and when you promote and stuff like that. And then like the number of levels you get as a promoted unit is probably going to be similar to what somebody like Kagetsu or Pandre are getting anyway, because like the promotion times, people start promoting around, you know, that time, and the amount of XP they get and blah blah blah. Like it's like pretty similar anyway. So I don't think that would actually matter very much at all, like that difference. I think it would mostly be down to the same kinds of things. So where does that leave us for expertise? I think I'm actually going to say that this is, to my surprise, because in general I'm not like a big believer in growths, but like as being important, but I think I am going to say that this goes all the way up in B tier somewhere, because I think it would maybe even, gosh, do I even want to put it in A tier? No, I don't think I want to put it in A tier, but I think I do want to put it, yeah, like I do want to put it in B tier. Do I want to put it above any of these other skills? That's... The thing is, all these other skills like are doing something as soon as you start, you know, using that unit and that skill, whereas this does nothing until you get some levels under you. But what it does give you once you get those levels is like the effect size is larger. I think I'm actually gonna go top of B. I could see myself revising this downwards in the future if I learn that the thresholds are easier to hit than I think they are. But I think this skill, like the thresholds do feel to me like they can be more demanding in the later parts of the game than that's not exactly right. It's like in the mid game they're demanding, and then there's a stretch where they get less demanding and then they get more demanding again, or something like that. It's like early mid game, late mid game, end game, or something like that. It's like early mid game they're very demanding, and then like late mid game they're like not so demanding, and then like end game they get demanding again when you aren't just like pure boss killing, which like sometimes you are. But so I could see myself revising this down if I decide that the thresholds that it would allow you to hit are not like it's like misaligned, and you're not getting those stats at the right time, like for it to be impactful. If that were the case, I could see it going all the way down to like bottom of C tier. I don't think I would move it any lower than that. But like, and I think I would leave it above Curious Dance probably. But yeah, I'm not very confident in this read. It would really depend a lot on like the timing of when you get those stat boosts. But I do think ultimately like being able to invest in something that's going to pay off in something that like is as if you used like a couple stat boosters, maybe that's legitimate. All right, well, I think we've got a tier list here, and I think if there's something about it I'm not happy with, I'm probably not going to be able to detect it at a glance. I will say that I think this demonstrates what I was talking about in terms of the weakness of the lower this is, it's bottom heavy. That's what I'm trying to say. This is a bottom heavy list. There's a lot of bad to useless skills, and I think that reflects like just the reality that like a lot of the skill design in this is very niche, and like it doesn't seem to be intended to be something that you can really like, you know, build around. Or like that's one of the reasons I like weapon insight, is like this is a skill you can kind of build around. You can take that and be like, okay, like I know what to do with this, you know. Whereas some of these other skills are just like what on earth is, like, I mean, these skills are bad for reasons that are, well, maybe not so much this one. These skills are bad for reasons that are like understandable to me, because it's like, you know, if you don't think about like the way that, you know, people are like actually playing the game or whatever, and you're like, oh, healing item stuff, like we can make healing items better, like sure, whatever, okay. But this one is just like, it's so wild to me that like the idea that this would be like a combat relevant skill, I don't know. That's like a really like a standout example of the how I think the design of these skills is like undercooked or something. But fortunately there are some good ones in there, even so, in the upper tiers. Anyway, so like I said, if you like, I don't know, this sort of thing and want me to do more of it, leave a comment and maybe I will. No promises though. I, for whatever reason, wanted to do this in particular, but I have no plans to do anything like this going forward. So thanks for watching, and I'll, you know, be back with at some point with more, or with my next Engage playthrough, the bracelets stuff. Until then.